Hi everyone, welcome. Good morning. I'm Michelle Charlton. I'm from Skills Education. Thanks for joining us. Today we've got Deb Carr with us and she's continuing her series on RPL and 10 tips for doing it better. I can see people coming in and dropping in their hellos. Good morning, Melissa. Good morning, Wendy. That's fantastic. Thank you. Exactly what we need you to be doing today. The chat window is where you can interact with Deb and ask your questions and shout outs to the rest of the audience as well. Certainly what we've been finding over the series of sessions that Deb has been presenting, there's a lot of conversation that comes up. So the chat window is a good way to do that. Now, while everyone is getting settled, I'll just let you know that Deb has also taken the time to research and provide handouts for today's session. They're already loaded into the handouts tab, so you can go across to that. It's the top right-hand side across from the chat. Download those handouts onto your computer straight away. And I also need to let you know, as part of our admin spiel, that this session is being recorded. So after the live session is finished, if you are unable to make the live session, you'll be able to catch up on everything that happened through the recording. You just head over to the VETA portal. Anyone who's registered can log in and access the recording there. After the live session, you'll also get an email just alerting you to the fact that the recording's available, but plus also an opportunity to provide feedback about the session. And as I always say, we know our presenters love the feedback that comes back so that there's an element of continuous improvement there. But the feedback email is a critical one to keep an eye out for from your point of view too, because that's what triggers your record of PD for the session. So now we've got all of the housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to introduce exactly what we're here today for. And as I said, Deb Carr is our very special guest, and she is continuing her series on ways to do RPL better. Today, Deb's going to prompt us to think about the way that we advertise RPL versus the coursework option and whether or not that might contribute to some of the ways candidates view the course. So I'm not going to give too much away because that's, what Deb is primed and ready to speak about. And I just also need to let you know that, as I said, all of these sessions are a part of a series that Deb's put together. And in fact, they're presenting her research that she completed as part of her recently completed Masters of Education. Her thesis was actually on the RPL candidate and a neglected stakeholder. So all of the information that we've been so lucky to have shared with us has been as a result of the research that Deb conducted to achieve that Masters of Education. That was a course that Deb did through Charles Darwin University. And as part of that, she was actually able to undertake an international study tour to Germany and Thailand. So she's got a wealth of experience from around the world, and we're really, really lucky to be able to access that in these sessions. Very, very lucky. As I said, Deb is our special guest, handing over to hear her expertise just now. Welcome, Deb.
Thanks so much, Michelle, and welcome attendees. Please make comments throughout in the chat section, and we'll try to address those at the towards the end of the session. I'm not that good at chatting and talking at the same time yet. So these sessions are for RPL managers and practitioners that seek to do RPL better. Today I will, as Michelle said, share findings from my research that are relevant to this topic. I'll also share interviews with you that I had with Emma Siebuhr, the National Training Manager for Fortress Learning, and Wendy Cato. But both will share good practice in implementing business models that charge the same for coursework and RPL pathways. Emma could not make it to join us today, but Brian West, founder and owner of Fortress Learning, is in our audience and can respond to commentary along the way, as well as we'll try and get him in live after the session, at the end of the session. My research revealed many problems associated with the practice of RPL. As I continue to research, listen and practice, potential solutions are evolving. This 10-part series delivers 10 possible solutions to doing RPL better, mainly at program level. I think these will improve RPL practice because they speak directly to candidate experience. I've tried to structure these webinars to provide you A, with evidence-based information on candidates' experience, B, real-life examples of good practice that offer solutions to improve those negative experiences. RPL Newsflash. OECD recently released a report on things VET can do in response to the global crisis of COVID-19. Included in the report was a call on VET systems across the world to utilise RPL as a direct route to qualifications, particularly for vulnerable groups, unfinished apprentices and older workers. News from the NCVER on how Australia utilises RPL. So RPL is trending down, only 3% of all assessments. There is a domestic fee-for-service market. It actually outfunds government. The international fee-for-service market for RPL is growing. So there is a market. This session will also share some other findings from this report, and both reports are in your handouts. So this urgent review by WA Department of Training and Workforce Development was recently released and provides a roadmap for economic recovery. Interestingly, governments are starting to focus on RPL as a mechanism to fast-track recovery. In this instance, they suggest RPL could help improve predicted skills shortages in the traditional trades, even more critical now as a result of COVID. I share these news flashes because it may help you to better reach and engage your market. Upcoming sessions. Number 8, throw out the RPL info book. It's intimidating and not that helpful. There will be an interesting presentation of both digital and human approaches, endeavouring to inform candidates in a digestible manner about RPL before enrolment. Our guests come from South Africa and WA. 9, invest in industry expertise. RPL guru John Price will join us for this session. Very exciting. Number 10, build partnerships with employers. This is in response to the second biggest difficulty candidates faced, and that is the dreaded third-party report. So my study consisted of 2 stages. Over 6 months, I conducted this research. I analysed over 54 interviews with assessors and candidates. 21 assessors had collective experience conducting over 5,000 RPL assessments across all AQFs. All institution types and many different training packages. In stage 2, research subjects were TAE RPL candidates. I sought their voice to understand challenges they were experiencing. They themselves were assessors undergoing RPL assessment. I followed their journey for 5 months. The research included a literature review and also a study tour to Germany and Thailand. So I collected insights into challenges candidates experience from the perspective of both assessors and candidates. Just looking for our slides. There we go. Throughout my study, it became evident there was an overwhelming expectation of, I've paid, where's my credential? Assessors told me this expectation spanned all levels of qualifications, all institution types, and many different industries. Research showed, in many cases, there is an expectation of a guaranteed product. Therefore, they felt a financial penalty if RPL was not granted. Assessors said, candidates said things like, hang on, I've paid you, where's my credential? Can't you just give it to me? There's misbelief somehow that RPL is not actually an assessment, that it's an alternative to an assessment. There's sentiment, can I trust this person with my money to make a fair judgment of me? Many think that this is just a tick and flick process. On the same token, TAE candidates, perhaps more in the know, said things like, I'm stuck. Like in Shakespeare, you know, I'm so steeped in blood now, I've got to do it. I can't back out now. I feel like I've already signed up. The money's spent. The money's out the door. There's a feeling of being stuck in the process because they've paid and or invested so much effort already. So these two different perspectives, same problem. Not happy with their purchase when there is no palatable alternative for RPL not granted. When I asked candidates for tips they would give other candidates, one research subject said, choose an RTO where there is no financial penalty to swap over to the course. If you need to change, there is no financial penalty. That reduces my anxiety massively. This was news to me. My experience had been that RPL was charged at a unit level and was charged at a portion of coursework. He explained this model also facilitated the continuation of his career management as transition into coursework was seamless and didn't transpire as a roadblock or regression. It got me thinking, why did this candidate say it reduced his anxiety? To me, it wasn't just the financial anxiety of the possibility of having to fork out more money. Money was not the only issue here. I was to learn the impact on candidates' mindset was that a financial penalty of RPL not granted was felt intensely as a fail. A model of no financial penalty to transition to coursework tempered the fear of failure. The ramifications of RPL not granted were lessened because there was no financial penalty. They could transition to coursework. A financial penalty feels like failure, whereas transitioning to coursework feels less like failure. In the minds of these candidates, if there needs to be an adjustment of RPL enrolment, it isn't perceived as failure. It's a transition. Implicitly, the availability of transitioning to coursework without financial penalty offers RPL as a service more than just as a static assessment. A career management service. The RPL process is perceived more as a skills audit, where the gap can be filled seamlessly, not hindering or regressing an individual's career management activity. To understand why candidates like this approach, why is it so important to candidates, we need to explore why candidates want RPL. What are the drivers? Why do people want RPL over coursework pathways? So my research included profiling candidates. Why are RPL candidates seeking credentials? People feel this gives them professional credibility. People wanted a credential for career redirection and or advancement. One candidate said that he likes to be useful for his organisation, and others wanted it to further their study. But why RPL as the preferred route? People want to be recognised for their experience. It boils down to that. Also, they do not want to start again. Is this a time thing or the fact they don't want to sit in a classroom? I'm not sure. Possibly a bit of both. Time. They need a shorter pathway and cannot fit in coursework. Many coursework pathways do not offer the flexibility needed for these busy mid-career people. Lastly, people want a skills audit service that is unique to the RPL route. They want to be confident in knowing that they know and what they don't know. Knowing the gaps is valuable for these candidates, even if it hurts their pride initially. They also want a type of work calibration. Check if they're doing it right in the workplace and benchmark their practices. This was particularly important for candidates who have had some changes to their position's responsibility or company restructures. So I chatted with assessors too, to get a broader view of RPL drivers for different types of candidates, not just TAE candidates. They said career progression. They want to progress further in the field or step up into higher roles. They're not even considered for a job unless they've got a certain qualification. Career changes. Mostly older people trying to reskill or to move in a particular direction for a particular job. One assessor said most of his candidates require a credential for commercial credibility and licensing changes impacting their businesses. This recent study by NCVER explored the use of RPL from 2015 to 2018 in Australia. They used logistic regression to identify which independent variable demonstrates a change in the propensity for RPL outcomes. From that, it was found candidates are more often male than female. RPL is more often funded through fee-for-service than government. It's noted that fee-for-service is not necessarily individuals. It could be employers. It could be peak bodies. Candidates are more likely to have already attained a level of education at Cert 3 or above. Candidates are more often older than 35 years than younger. Candidates are more likely to identify as without a disability. Candidates are more likely to be non-Indigenous. Non-apprentices use RPL more. Candidates are more likely to be employed than unemployed. And lastly, candidates certificates 3 and above utilise RPL more than those certificates below Cert 3. Is this a surprise for you? How is your data at your RTO same or different? Certainly for my small sample in my research, that was true, except for the gender balance. There was a lot more females than male. I'd like to share just a quick insight, and perhaps I do digress a couple of seconds. For a mechanism that was supposed to help vulnerable groups, A, engage with the formal system, and B, improve employability, these are not good stats. Most people already have a post-school qualification, and most people are already employed. So, shopping for RPL. Customers are becoming savvier and research their purchase decisions. RPL candidates in my study were themselves assessors and understood assessment as a service rather than a guaranteed product. They were able to articulate what they were looking for and when they were shopping for RPL. As trainers and assessors, I guess they're more informed customers and a little more in the know than your mainstream. So I was interested in their feedback. Verbatim, they said, I told them I'm not after shortcuts. I want to do it properly. If there are knowledge gaps, hopefully it will be filled with coursework. So that's fine. I searched their websites. I looked for student feedback. I looked for a large number of good reviews. I rang a few RTOs to see what would be suitable for my circumstances. And I chose this one because they said they would give me a program that would be more tailored to my situation. I trust this RTO, and it's been an extremely comprehensive RPL process. I looked at a couple of different providers because I wanted there to be some rigour. I chose a reputable RTO. I didn't go with the cheapest one. So basically, we're in a market that is looking for a time-saving method to a qualification for career advancement or change. Knowing that communicates two things. Cost saving is not the primary concern, and RPL is sought as a career management tool. RPL is a service, not a guaranteed product. So Emma Siebuhr is from Fortress Learning, They have charged the same for both RPL and coursework pathways successfully for 10 years. Her top tip: have a decent conversation with candidates before enrolment. So let's listen to how this business model works for Fortress Learning. Good morning, Emma. Thanks for joining us again today.
Good morning, Deb. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. You mentioned before your iTecher presentation. What was that on?
Oh, it was at the World Vet Conference, and it was actually about maintaining the integrity of RPL. So there was a 4-step process there to how we can assess for RPL in a really good way.
Yes.
You know, with some learning involved and assessor knowledge and everything like that. So yeah, it went well.
So that 4-step process, was that the one that you put in our handout sheets
Yes.
2 sessions ago? Great. Excellent.
Yes.
Oh, I'll be interested to hear more about that. So why I've invited you for today is you have a business model where you charge equal whether the client chooses the RPL route or full coursework route. Can you explain that business model for us?
Yes, so with recognition of prior learning assessment or coursework assessment, at the end of the day, you're still assessing the entire unit. So it's very different than credit transfer. For example, it's not an exemption from assessment, so there is still a process involved, sometimes a more lengthy and individualised process sometimes than even happens with coursework. So while we're happy and we move forwards with some forms of blended courses and programs with a bit of RPL and a bit of coursework, we do charge the same because the time taken on that RPL to make it a good process for the student is the same, if not more, for RPL. So yeah, it's equal.
Okay, so even people that enrolled in coursework do RPL?
So not for one unit. So it may be that they've enrolled for a qualification. They're able to, or they're eligible for recognition of prior learning for some of the units, but not all. So they'd have a mixed pathway. But even then, there are some units where people may have some evidence that they've, that they have done that in their workplace before, but not all. So we can then blend the coursework and RPL pathway together. It becomes a very tailored course, very individualised for that particular learner. And so cost-wise, resource-wise, the time taken is more for the assessor, but it's a better journey for the student, which is why sometimes that charge doesn't matter.
So, which brings me on to the next question. Why did you choose that business model?
The flexibility, the fact that each learner is then getting the journey that they want that reflects their needs, being able to align all that they've done before, all that they need to do, so bridge those gaps, finding out where they are now, where they want to be, and bridging the gaps between the two for each individual makes for an unbelievably more engaging and responsive journey for the student. So that's why we chose to do it.
Yeah, certainly the candidates that I spoke with liked the idea that it wasn't a failure if they didn't RPL.
Absolutely. We have, in pre-enrollment conversations, it's a discussion we have all the time, and talking to the students saying, well, we can try this, we can set your plan up. So we do an individual plan for each student prior to enrollment, and this can be set up, in a combination of recognition of prior learning and some coursework. If though, we get 2 months in and circumstances changing like COVID, you can't get in your workplace, we can flip that, we can swap it. So it's not static. You're not stuck with what we've said at the beginning. You can always change.
So how is there a procedure they transition from one to the other?
In terms of coursework to RPL?
Yep, or RPL
yes,
coursework.
Yes, so they would be taken through, so they'd start with RPL, if that is what they have said that they are eligible for. However, in those pre-enrollment conversations, it can be, you don't know until you're able to see and go through everything, so once they get to it, they may look, for example, so they have a dashboard, they have an RPL evidence guide on their dashboard, which comprises of the different sort of contextualised steps of the criteria they need to evidence, and through that conversation they may then find, you know, oh, I can't provide this evidence, I don't have this evidence, that's where we then have a discussion, and we might move or blend some of the training with the evidence that they have.
And there's no financial penalty for that?
None, no.
Do you find that people that have enrolled in coursework have, once they've started the course, start to think, oh, actually, I know all this, I've done all this?
Yes, yeah, so it happens, it does happen, much more for our diploma than for our Cert 4, but it does happen, and they'll say, oh, you know, I've done this before. And in that case, you know, depending on what particular type of assessment tool is being used, for example, to assess them, we may allow then instead of the scaffolded template sort of completion of a project, they would change it up and use their own evidence in its place. So they'd still complete that coursework pathway, but rather than it be pure coursework, they'll mix it up with their own evidence.
You know, inherently, all assessment is a blend, because our rule with flexible assessment says that the evidence can come from anywhere.
Should be. There should be an allowance for that flexibility and for blending of existing evidence and new, you know, new that's happening right now and existing that might have happened a little while ago. So yeah, I agree.
And the sentiment of the candidates, they like this?
Oh, it's about them being unique. So the students feel that they're not one of many, I guess, but more one of a kind. So they're feeling, you know, I have my own plan here. This provider actually has taken into account what I do. They're looking at what I do, and they're helping me to do the things that I can't do. So
you're identifying the gaps, and that's a valuable service for them.
It's a very valuable service and allows us, as we're talking about here, to charge that equal amount. So it's more about the program as a whole, not the actual assessment pathway. So it's the same charge for the program, regardless of whether you're completing it fully by coursework or with some RPL attached. I guess one of the factors as well is that if there is RPL within that qualification, it could possibly reduce the time spent completing that qualification. So that's a factor, but it doesn't limit the cost. So it might mean that they might achieve their qualification sooner, but it's not going to cost less in terms of the process that they're going through.
That was a big driver and a benefit that my candidates looked for when they shopped for RPL, that it was a time saver, not so much a cost saver.
That's right. And, you know, that's up to the provider as well to be responsive. So to keep, if the student is completing or supplying you with evidence, or they are wanting those conversations, that it happens, that there isn't a lot of dilly-dallying, you know, and, oh, I haven't got an appointment for 4 weeks, so that we keep the momentum up.
Yeah, I do see that you've got a standard for your assessors. It's 4 working days turnaround.
We do, yes, which is a huge driver in, you know, people enrolling with us.
Absolutely. If it's if time is the benefit that people are willing to pay a little bit more for, well, then you've got to deliver on that.
That's right. Oh, absolutely. And we meet our service standards. We report on them, and we report publicly on them. So each week on our website, at the front of our website, we give a percentage of those figures. So we'll let people know how many were marked within 4, 3, 2 and 1 days.
Yeah, I actually did see that.
It's quite it's quite transparent.
Yeah.
Can
you tell me if your candidates find value in having the gaps in their skills and knowledge identified in this process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are occasions that you may have candidates come in with, I guess, a belief that they know more, or that they're competent when they're not, which can be difficult if you are identifying gaps, and it is a conversation you have to have. So again, that comes down to communication skills of an assessor, and being able to, you know, discuss with that candidate without them feeling disempowered, and talking about, you know, so yeah, communication skills help that. But the majority of our students will come in identifying their own gaps a lot of the time, saying, I definitely have done this, I know I've done that, and that. And the LLN is a perfect example. Much of the LLN unit contains criteria that trainers and assessors do every day, you know, supporting students, reasonably adjusting, using instructional strategies. But not many of them would have maybe used the Australian Core Skills Framework to identify core skills. So there are areas of that unit that they do every day that they're very confident in, and those that they haven't ever done before. So we can blend those type of units, and much of the students are happy and they leave quite empowered because they've been able to use what they know, but also learn a lot more in the process.
So it hasn't been a disempowering process to learn what they don't know.
Absolutely not. And sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So, you know, it's having that conversation, really they learn more that they're taking and using in their workplace, which is wonderful. It's what it should be.
So this is an economically viable business model.
Yeah, it's worked for us for 10 years. So it's, you know, there's never been a less sort of a less money for RPL. So not that we've ever used. So yeah, I'd say it's economically viable.
Yep. What is a critical strategy for RTOs? And I don't want you to share too much of your business commercial secrets. But what is a critical strategies for RTOs if they wanted to apply this business model?
Having a conversation with the student before they enroll. So having a decent conversation, not a standard stock checklisty type thing, but having, and not a, I guess, front of house administrative conversation, but with an assessor, with somebody that can talk to that student, that understands the context of what they're talking about, that is able then to ask targeted questions aligned to the unit criteria. So they can ask the student in their own language, within their own industry, whatever the industry is, and know whether or not that student is actually going to be able to get RPL or not. And that lets you then develop a plan. So that's the very first thing we do.
Yeah, this has come up again and again in every session, that first conversation with the candidates is worth their time spent in that.
It will save you as a business, you know, and this is for any student. It will save you as a business so much money in time and resources if you know exactly where that student needs to head or what their journey is going to look like at the beginning.
It also increases retention from my study as well.
Absolutely. It increases completion, because, you know, if you know that that student, for example, is entering a course where possibly they're not going to complete, there are reasons that they might not complete, you can have that conversation with them. So it's a way of guiding them. An example would be someone enrolling for the TE with absolutely no industry experience. So we've got the prerequisite vocational competency. They might have just completed a business qualification, but they've got no experience. They've never worked in that industry, and they want to do a TAE straight off just to train it. And, you know, you can have a conversation to say, better maybe to get a bit of experience and then come in and, you know, learn to teach it. So having those types of conversations, so important, and saves you money too.
And builds your reputation, because students do talk. Also, I imagine that you would have to have in the background to run this model, a very integral benchmarking system.
Standard operating procedures and processes, you know, values, the culture, you know, of wanting to help people. But again, these types of conversations, these types of RPL conversations, they can't happen as a process. So it's because they're so individualized, it's really about, I guess, knowledge as well from the assessor's point of view of that area, that industry area, and understanding, you know, all the different types of people they're going to be talking to are going to be telling you different things, but all of those different things need to somehow connect with what it is that they're being assessed in. So you need to know.
Well, that's what I was indicating, that you would have to have a documentation or a recording system that is very workable for the assessor to collect a myriad of different types of evidence pieces.
Oh yes, and the initial conversation, there is a standard set of questions, and those questions are really, I guess, open-ended questions, but that tie directly to the unit criteria. So you're talking them to the student in a familiar language that they would understand, but using that unit criteria, and it's very documented. We call it a personal learning plan.
Okay.
And we have a survey. So for those students that can't have a conversation, we can email that to them. They can complete it if they're remote. But we can also have the same conversation, but we call it discovery session, using those questions. Yeah.
That's a good name.
Mm.
One last question. What do you award in your VET-track or your student management system? Is it RPL or is it competency achieved?
So it's very dependent on the overall assessment or the combination. If there's any form of coursework, you know, knowledge questions, for example, that are standard knowledge questions as part of that RPL, we would deem them competent.
Okay.
So competency awarded. If it's full RPL, so if they have achieved that whole unit through provision of evidence, professional conversations, shadowing, or observer conversations, we'd have RPL granted.
It's very straightforward. It's is any of do you receive funding for any of your programs?
We don't. So we're a fee for service organisation.
Okay.
So always no funding at all.
Yeah. I know that there is rules and criteria around blended situations for RPL outcomes when you're receiving funding, particularly because RPL is funded at a reduced rate to coursework.
Yes. It's very interesting. I mean, we would always say that if it's RPL, it's only RPL in a unit if I guess that the entire RPL has been granted, if that unit has been achieved through the recognition of their prior learning, not through training or even a blend of training and then assessment, because it's not all recognition. So that would be competency awarded, yeah.
Thank you very much for your time today, Emma. Is there any last words, any key strategy that you would like to share?
Only just again, truly knowing your students and having that relationship at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's not only beneficial to them, it will help your business. Word of mouth is always such a good business builder. So I'd say, yeah, have that conversation, get to know them. That's it.
Thank you for your time, Emma.
Thanks, Steph. Bye.
Thanks, Emma. Now we're just going to quickly hear from Wendy Cato. She's mentored and supported individuals in large-scale RPLs over the last 15 years. She shares different programs that have used this model. We look at different RPL buyers, such as industry training bodies, employers, and industry levies, as well as individuals.
Bye.
Probably been involved with the assessment of maybe around 1,000 people that have gone through on that model. That model is based on doing the entire course initially, or attempting to do the entire course through RPL, and then where in some areas where perhaps 1 or 2 units they may not have covered in their experiences because it's outside their job role, but it's just happened to be in the course. Then there's the negotiation that goes on about whether that might happen through coursework itself, or whether they can do a project in their workplace and provide that as evidence, because that depends on their view to coming and sitting in a class. And there are a number of people who want to do RPL, but the last thing they want to do is sit in a class because they didn't like it that time around. So yeah, and it ranges across a number of areas for a number of reasons, such as licensing upgrades, changes to government regulations that people need to have certain qualifications, people who just want to have their skills recognised for whatever reason. And some of the larger projects I worked on were large-scale automotive industries where a large number of people were being made redundant. And so in order to amplify or enhance their ability to gain further employment, RPL was used to map across the skills that they gain in the industry into other areas of more usable qualifications, such as frontline management, engineering, and project management.
I've seen that doing that for people transitioning out of defence as well. So with these programs that you're talking about, if there is a gap and this is within the whole qualification, not single units of competency. So there's a gap in the qualification, and they need to transition into coursework or perhaps assessment only, as you indicated there. There's no financial penalty. They don't need to pay more.
No, most of the people, or most of the projects that I've worked on have been funded from different areas. So a couple of them were funded by industry training boards that had gained money from the government, or in the construction case, they have a levy in South Australia, so they use the money from the levy to pay for the upgrade to qualifications. In other cases, it's been paid from businesses or organisations that want their staff to have their qualifications, because otherwise they're going to lose good staff, and their staff can't afford to pay or don't want to go to school. And in other cases, they're paid for by the applicant, because the applicant actually sees, that there's a necessity, and it might be a licence upgrade, such as the real estate agents in South Australia. They all paid for their own RPLs.
The individuals?
Yes, yes.
So how did they feel? How do you think it impacts the individuals when they have that opportunity that, okay, here's a gap, that doesn't mean that I've failed, I can just transition over?
Yeah. We had to tread very carefully. The RTO had hired me to go out and see all these real estate agents who are independent operators. So some of them hadn't been to school for quite some time. They didn't know how to collect evidence. The whole thing about RPLing was very confusing to them. They didn't have time to go and sit in a class for 12 months because they were running businesses. And so they wanted that kind of support where somebody would go out and say, we can get evidence from here, we can get evidence from there, I can put this into a portfolio. We need to ask some alternative people, because they were running their own businesses, and a lot of the units were around keeping trusts and those sorts of things. We could get evidence from their accountants, because they have to hold trusts, and so their accountants could give them evidence. So, and as I said, many of them didn't want to go into a classroom. They were assessophobic. And so it was about finding out ways that we could actually assist them into providing that evidence. Where, there was a couple of areas that some of them did have to do, but they were more fun areas, or what I call fun areas. Like that. Many of them didn't hold auctioneers qualifications, and not all real estate agents are auctioneers, but there is a unit inside that certificate that they had to have that was about auctioneering. So they set up some role plays, some mock plays. They also, some of them hired auctioneers to do the auctions for their own real estate. So they started following them around and did a little bit of, practice with them, and then came in and did that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So there's two drivers there actually that I'd like to pick up on, is that the time saving was more important than the cost saving for these guys.
These guys had a running business.
Yeah.
All of them.
The other one was that the assessophobic, you're saying. So the RPL construct was a lot more appealing to them than having to sit in the classroom and sit a standardised test.
Absolutely. I'd say just about in every single case where I've been on the large side. So the automotive industry, the construction industry, even the bookkeeping and the aged care industry was all about having people who basically left school at an early age, did not want to go back into a classroom, were frightened of what was going to happen to them, and needed a supportive environment that was going to help them identify and reduce the stress on them in terms of their fears of having to go back into a classroom.
Do you think these people have an additional fear of failing?
Oh, absolutely. That's why they don't want to go into classroom, because when they were in the classroom, some well-meaning teacher has obviously laid them as dumb or stupid or, not trying and useless. And they spent a lot of time in the corner or as the class clown. And so they left school, in the construction industry, a lot of these guys have left school at 14, 15, because I'm talking about the people that we did in, there's 200 in that field. They were mainly in their 40 plus years, and a lot of them were 50 plus. And some of them had left school at like 12. And they weren't looking forward to doing it again.
Yeah, I do hold that a RPL not granted can sometimes feel like another failure.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why they don't line up for courses. Unless they know you know, like who the RTO is. Like the RTO we did the construction one through was through the construction industry itself. It's run by the CMFEU, which most of them are members of, and it's very hands and on practical type based, and many of their trainers themselves understand how these people feel in a classroom. So they're very laid back classes when they do them. There's not a whole lot of, you know, they talk a lot anecdotally about their experiences, and that's how they train.
Can you tell me, you mentioned before in the context of aged care, how did you help to communicate that those gap areas, that feeling of I haven't got RPL for these gap areas in the context of that aged care project that you're working on?
I didn't actually work on that project. It's a project that I watched with a lot of interest.
Yep.
That was run by the what was then the Health Industry Training Board, and that was due to, I think it was about, trying to remember now, probably early 2000, that where all aged care workers are required to have Certificate 3.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the profile of that group, because the gentleman that ran it, Brian Spence, was my mentor, he was telling me the profile of that group was that they were mainly women,
mm-hmm.
they mainly work casual, and mainly from non-English speaking background. Mm. So the thought of them having to go, you know, into a school, into a classroom, into all this thing where they, you know, they struggle to read, you know, some forms of English, particularly like textbooks and things like that, that this was going to be a massive change within the industry, that if they forced all these women into school, A, they couldn't afford it, B, they would be losing their money, and C, most of them would fail in the traditional type system. So Brian Spence set up this great RPL situation. They had to take through 10,000 people nationally.
Wow.
That's how many people they were going to lose if they couldn't get an RPL, an appropriate RPL process set up around the country to assist these women. They had 12 months, I think it was 12 months, to get them all to get to their Certificate 3 in aged care. Otherwise, there was no workers. Mm. You know, very similar to what everybody's been saying throughout these sessions. You've got to have a conversation first. Mm. You've got to help them get the evidence. You know, you've got to help them gather the evidence, be supportive, and then you have an evaluation where you say, well, okay, you haven't got this, you haven't got that, and then you decide what you're going to do. Now, that's whether you're going to put them into a class or whether you're going to set them some more projects.
So who paid for that big project? Who paid for those 10,000?
I'm assuming it's the federal government, because the money would have been given to the old ISE, Industry Skills Council, to fund that kind of project, because the government was well aware that if the people couldn't afford to pay for it, and the government had mandated this, and if they didn't cough up some money, then where were the aged care workers coming from? Because they all would have left. This is the time for RTOs to start thinking about, you know, if it's fee for service and it's the government, or it's somebody else, or it's somebody that's making all of their workers redundant, like, I don't know, Virgin or someone, I don't know what they're doing with their redundant workers. But if there's somebody that's in that vein, and there's somebody, you know, saying, you know, we've got all these people, we know we have all these people that need to be assessed. What we need to do is find the mechanisms of doing it, because again, a lot of these people are not going to want to walk into a classroom. And B, some of them are so desperate to get into work and have got skills, they don't want to wait 18 months until we deliver it.
It seems like an ideal approach, really, that a candidate can pay the one price and RPL what they can, and then coursework for what they can't at qualification level, all in the one place. It doesn't then, in my research, some of the people that were looking at no RPL, that was a huge roadblock for their career management. I mean, the time that was lost, not just the finances, that is lost now, and so they're back 6 months.
Yeah. Oh, well, I found, you know, and there are examples, you know, where one person who wanted RPL, he'd been working for an accountant for some time, and he applied to an RTO that was an accounting specialist, and they said $5,000. So you'd think that would be like fee for service coursework. No, they sent him basically a book, and basically it contained all of the units of competency, which he did not understand, and told him that he had 3 months to get his evidence in for $5,000. After that, it was hard cheese, nothing. So he didn't get his evidence in. He wasn't offered coursework as a support. He just lost $5,000 for nothing. And I've seen that before where people have applied for RPL, and the RTO has been very good at taking their money, and when said, oh no, sorry, you haven't got this. Oh, and we'll charge you an extra, whatever else for you now to come into the course. And I was like, really? Haven't you, taken enough money off me already? So,
that's
there is
fraudulent, really, isn't it?
It is. To me, it is. If you're going to charge that kind of money, then you need to be offering a service. And I don't care if you say, oh, it's an RPL service and they didn't make it. Well, maybe they didn't make it because you didn't try hard enough, because that's what I would think if I was the applicant, that you didn't try hard enough. And now that I'm not yet competent, I now have to enrol for additional money to come into your class. Now, you don't think I think that's a rip-off? Of course I do. Absolutely I do.
But there's two things there. Is there an expectation by the candidate this is guaranteed product, but there's also an expectation, which is valid, that I want to be fairly assessed and comprehensively assessed as well. Absolutely. So clarity around how you're doing the RPL process and what the person is actually getting for that money is essential. And I can guarantee you, in some of those bigger contracts, like with the government and stuff, it will be written into the contract that where people don't get RPL, the RTO is not getting any extra money, but they will take those people through to finalise their qualification, because that's what they're getting paid for. Can you tell me, so we've looked at government paid programs, we've looked at self-funded programs, like in regards to the real estate professionals. What about, bookkeeping?
Employer.
Employer paid.
There are employer-funded programs. There was one case, or one client, and again, I was hired by the RTO to go up to Queensland. And what happened there was that they had a legislative change in Queensland where all bookkeepers had to hold a certificate 4 in bookkeeping. And this client was a large bookkeeping company who did books for all sorts of small businesses. Most of her bookkeepers, or most of the company's bookkeepers, were women. Most of them were part-time, because they had children and just working part-time. And most of them weren't really interested in going and doing a class. One of the women I met, she had no confidence whatsoever, and even when I talked to her about RPL, she said, no, I can't do that. And when I talked to the boss, I said, why did you want me to speak to her? She said she can't do it. She said, Wendy, she's been employed here for 7 years. Do you think I'd be employing her if she couldn't do it? Oh, she did fine. I mean, I said to her, just show me your work, show me this, and show me where you've done that. And the employer actually showed me some parts, and they're all, like the jobs are all allocated to certain bookkeepers, so it's her stuff. So the employer isn't trying to run somebody else's stuff by me. And I had a discussion with her, and I said, how long have you been here? And she's like, 7 years. And I said, so what do you do? And she's like, I just do books, So again, there are some issues around some people in terms of their literacy for RPL, in terms of their language and being able to articulate the evidence, which is why I absolutely advocate that when you're doing a lot of this stuff, or RPL, that where the person is working, the assessor needs to get into the worksite and watch them and talk to co-workers if this person isn't going to be able to have the language.
Wendy, in this program that was employer paid, how did it transpire? How did coursework transpire?
Anything that anything that the students didn't get, because the RTO is paid directly. They hired me as a subcontractor to go in and collect all the evidence and everything for them, because they didn't have anybody there, put it into a portfolio. Anything that was left, like some of them may not have had certain areas, then they would have been taken through the course or done it, like either on site, because if there was a couple of them, they probably would have gone out on site.
And there was no additional cost for that?
No. No, it's all, you know, as I said, all of the ones that I've worked for have all been about qualifications. The people that have been selected basically on their years of service and what they've been doing. So it's not like somebody that came in and did something yesterday and is wanting RPL for a whole qualification. So even with the construction industry guys that I did, the 200 riggers and scaffolders, they must have been in the industry for at least 5 to 10 years. They must have held certain licensing, like dogging and rigging licenses, tickets, which are different from the course. In the aged care one that I was telling you about with the 10,000, the women had to be employed for X amount of years before they were going to be eligible for the RPL process. The bookkeeping one, I wasn't talking to anybody that hadn't been in there for, 5+ years or something. So, and the same with the real estate agents. I wasn't referred to anybody that started up business yesterday. All of these people had been in business for 10+ years. So
that's interesting, because
yeah.
Emma said the same, for this business model to work, it has to be those that have a likelihood, or kind of like a pre-assessment of likelihood,
yes,
to enter into this business model.
Yeah, it usually relates to workers who have been in a field or a field. They don't have to necessarily have been in the exact field.
Yes.
So, like with the workers in the automotive industry,
mm-hmm.
they have been in the automotive industry. Mm-hmm. The people that I was working with, they had a Certificate 3 in automotive manufacturing, which was pretty useless at that stage, and so they were swapped
out of the industry. You mean?
Yeah. So they were swapped, or the RPL process took them through from a Certificate 3 or higher in engineering, because the engineering and the manufacturing are closely aligned, the training packages. They also got, many of them also got Certificate 4 or higher in frontline management and Certificate 4 or higher in project management. So the skills that they were RPL for weren't, people go, oh, well, they've just been working on the line in Mitsubishi's. Well, they did more than that you need to understand, the process. And that's why I'm saying in some of those larger ones, you actually need to get your assessors out there and in there to actually ask questions about what they're doing and what they have been doing on the job. Because until you ask those questions, you didn't find out that most of them were team leaders. All you saw was a row of people, standing in front of a production line. I'm just going to leave you with one thought about one guy I met who was out at Bridgestone, and I thought, never make assumptions. Yeah, on a project line was, on a line thinking the same thing. I sat down and talked to this guy. He ran the whole reticulation system, the recycling system, the water system. They had ponds and everything else. And while I'm thinking manufacturing or engineering, he wound up with something like an advanced diploma in conservation land management or something.
Wow.
So you do get things come out of left field.
Huh. Thanks, Wendy. Sorry, I was so busy with the comments that are going on here. Really interesting conversations that we're having in the chats around a practice perhaps that is common around bait and switch. So I was helping out with the NCBER study into RPL, and we chatted about the Vox stats, and I said, and they believe so too, that RPL not granted stats are suspiciously low. So I was wondering and Melissa's saying that is there practice of baiting people into RPL and then transitioning them over to coursework? Is this just another strategy that some RTOs use to avoid RPL? I'm suggesting that possibly is a common practice. Another conversation that we're having in the chats box is around how RPL can enable transferable skills. Particularly, Melissa says that's the salt of a good RPL assessor, being able to identify the skills and the alignment with other areas of work and qualifications and skill sets. That is so critical now, as we've got people transitioning from from different careers to different disciplines, more so than ever, even before COVID, but more so now after COVID. We do have a question here, or a wondering by Brian, saying, I wonder what we would find if we had a new code for a VETMIS, where a unit is awarded based on competency achieved / RPL partly granted. I think this is a really quite attractive product, as we've seen throughout this whole presentation, that it is what people want. They want to be recognised for what they already have, but they also want to address those gaps. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, I'm back. And agreed, Deb. It's such an interesting conversation. I don't know if Wendy and Brian are able to unmute their mics if they wanted to jump on and have some verbal input to the discussion. But I think some of what's coming through in the chat window does indicate that there's definitely a need for further research within our own framework as to the reporting and the granting and some of the perceptions around what's going on, and even what Melissa was saying there, that the salt of a good RPL assessor is being able to identify all of those skills and align them to the different qualifications. It's going to be very interesting perhaps to find out, even through some research, how many good RPL assessors are out there, because if there's not that many RTOs going down that track, it brings up the question as to why. Why are they not focusing on this as a viable option for an assessment pathway?
Your comments, Brian?
Don't know if Brian's frozen or not. He looks deep in thought. I can see that the mic is on with Brian, but not
what
getting
what I was really interested with, so there's capability and capacity, but Emma also mentioned organisational culture, that there needs to be a shift of culture in providing this model. And I imagine that culture is towards providing a service rather than an assessment for a product.
It is interesting. And again, as we said, perhaps a whole new body of research that could be conducted around this, because culture is such a powerful thing within any organisation. And if the culture isn't conducive to, undertaking RPL as a process, that's a very powerful outcome.
There was a study by Bowen Clayton in 2003, and that was one of the biggest barriers, was that assessors didn't believe in RPL, perhaps the stigma that we were talking about in the chat box. Brian mentioned that some people feel as if they don't want other people to know that they've gained a part of their qualification through RPL, because there is a stigma attached to that. It's been a barrier for some time.
I'm not suggesting that we've got all of the answers for all of the questions, but it does beg the question, why is there that stigma, and what process of relearning and retraining is going to need to be involved to switch over that thinking? And Brian looks like he's back and unfrozen. So welcome.
It is winter.
Yes.
You're not in Victoria though, Brian.
No, that's true. That's true. I am wearing a T-shirt. Yeah. Sorry.
We were talking about, workplace culture to enable this model.
Oh.
For the RTO.
Yeah, I think the culture really comes down to having a place where the assessors are themselves empowered to use their professional judgment at the very beginning of the relationship with the student. This is before the person's even enrolled, to enable them to use their own sort of life skills, if you like, to somehow identify with that potential student where the potential lies for this process. That can take time, and it can also rely very heavily on people using their own judgment with regards to how to interact with people. I think having a culture where that can happen isn't necessarily something that happens automatically, It's also a culture, if we're talking about fee for service and commercial operations, it's also a culture where there's not pressure to secure a sale from every inquiry, where in fact in our organisation it's quite the opposite, where we say our focus here is on ensuring before anyone has given any money, before money's even discussed, where the focus is on ensuring that that person does actually have expectations that are aligned with our own, and that that person does understand what is their likelihood of success and what would be involved in that. Until we've gotten through those things, then I don't think we can ever possibly have a culture where we can have that level of openness and transparency at the beginning.
Yeah. Melissa mentioned something that I actually wrote in my thesis around, called the assessors, the meat in the sandwich. And that was because of the workplace culture not allowing or giving agency, like you said, for assessors to make those professional judgments, to work outside the template, and to invest time into the assessment. There wasn't the agency given to the assessors, and they knew what needed to be done, and they felt like hampered, that they couldn't give the support and the flexibility they needed to have a good RPL experience for candidates.
I'd agree with that, and I'd think also that that is compounded when you have models that are based on RPL only. So there's this additional, and I'd call it somewhat artificial, constraint on the assessor to be limited only to being assessing through the lens of prior learning, whatever that may be. As soon as you remove the limitation on that, then you're actually removing the anxiety for both the assessor and the learner. And going back to your, the topic of this particular this particular webinar today, it is about keeping an open mind to enable the process to encompass whatever is needed in order for that learner to achieve the outcome that they have in mind, which ultimately is a decision that they are competent in something. The actual desire by them to have that decision based on RPL I don't think it's actually necessarily based on them wanting RPL specifically. They just don't want to necessarily have to do the alternative entirely as they see it.
Well, the two biggest drivers were a time saving and avoiding the classroom.
It would be interesting too, though, from the students' perspective, how many of them, and Wendy mentioned the word literacy around RPL, how many students actually understand what this RPL thing is? Are they signing up because they're deliberately looking for an RPL outcome, or are they signing up because they just want a piece of paper, regardless of how that comes about? So perhaps another one to add to the research list.
Well, they don't know what they know a lot of the times, but they are wanting to change career or progress their career. So it's a career question. It's a service.
Yeah, definitely. And as you've alluded to many times already, Deb, like the current situation that we're experiencing now, and the focus that we're being encouraged to give to RPL as a way to quickly pivot the workforce and access the existing knowledge and skills that they've got and apply them to a different occupation or a different industry so that we can, get the economy back on its feet. It is, again, an interesting thing, because if people don't know what they know, is it going to trigger the thought that, I could potentially go and apply for this piece of paper that's going to allow me to get employment in a different industry? So that I feel like there's almost a disconnect in terms of the educative process around what it is that we're being told is important, what we know is important, and the end user being able to identify that as being important.
That's why I think my second session was teach RPL,
Yeah.
So it's around RPL literacy, and during that process, the person starts to become more aware of their learning and progressively more in control of that. And that includes having a look at the landscape, having a look at my skills and where they can be best applied for my aspirations and values.
I think even though you've only chosen 10 sessions, Deb, the questions and discussion that come out of them, there's the potential to go on to another 10 perhaps.
Easily.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap up there. Brian, did you want to give any key strategies for an RTO that's looking at transitioning, to a blended model?
Oh, for sure. I think the number one is to get the communication strategy as clear as you can make it from the point of view of your potential students. So the people who are involved in this really look at what are the experiences they're having and how your particular structure is going to address those experiences for them. Being able to communicate it in those terms, I think, is key. One, to being able to communicate to them, but also making clear for your own staff within your own organisation what the bigger picture is, so that you can then counter and perhaps massage, reform some of your own internal, some of the existing internal judgments and assumptions about what RPL is and should be and how it should be done, etc., which is another conversation as well.
On that, I should actually inform people that Wendy's got a Mastering RPL ebook that I've included in the handouts that's available for everyone that's attended this session.
Thank you, Wendy.
All right, that's a wrap.
Okay, well, I'll take my cue. Thank you very, very much to Brian and Wendy, always coming on and supporting Deb. Emma too, because even though she's not here, Emma did certainly spend the time to record the interview with you, Deb. Anyone who's interested in continuing the series with Deb, it's on the 21st, which is next Friday, and you're going to be talking about throwing out that RPL book. So that's going to be an interesting one.
That got over 2,000 hits on the LinkedIn. There's a lot of discussion around trying to streamline that first process. There's like a great divide between the human approach and the digital approach. So that's going to be really interesting.
Okay, well, I'll be here. You'll be here. We look forward to seeing as many people that are going to be interested in that particular topic on next Friday as well.
Thanks very much, Michelle.
You're welcome. Thanks, everyone, for your time. We'll see you then.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Brian.
Bye.
Thank you.